Hi everyone, this is Mr. Trio, and today we begin a new unit, which is How Secure Was the USSR's Control over Eastern Europe, 1948 through 1989. This will be the first video in the series and is just an overview introduction to the topic. Now, when we think of the Soviet Union, many students often think of Russia. And certainly it is true to place an importance on Russia because Russia is the largest country of the Soviet Union. There was a revolution in Russia, the Tsar was overtaken, and essentially the Russian state became a communist nation and began to join with others. These included the Balkan states such as Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. It also included the Stans, or sometimes that's what they're referred to because they all end in Stan. There's also Ukraine, Belarus, Moldova, and then finally Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Armenia. All of these nations together form what is known as the Soviet Union. As we look at a map in corresponding colors, you can see once again the importance that Russia plays because it is certainly the largest. And it is also where the capital of the Soviet Union was located, in Moscow. As a reminder, the Soviet Union and the United States fight together in World War II in order to defeat Nazi Germany. But at the end of the war, as you may remember, there were tensions that grew between the West and the Soviet Union. One of the things that the Soviet Union was most concerned about was being invaded in the future. And essentially it created a sphere of influence with countries such as Poland, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary. And the idea was that these nations could essentially support the Soviet Union in its rebuilding and also provide raw materials, mainly foodstuffs, to the Soviet Union. There's a series of diplomatic arrangements known as Comcon in 1949 and also the Warsaw Pact in 1955, which says that if any of these nations was attacked, the others would support each other. Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, who was now in retirement, referred to this as the Iron Curtain, in which countries which were on the east side, like Poland and East Germany and Hungary, were now a part of the Soviet sphere of influence and blocked from the democratic ideas of the West. Let us go through the big ideas that we will be covering in this unit. The first is examining the role of the Soviet Union over countries in Eastern Europe. One of the things that I would ask you to focus on is think about the motives and aims of the Soviet Union in Eastern Europe. Second, comparing how different nations face Soviet rule. This we are going to take a look at specifically the protesters against the Soviet Union, first in Hungary and then in Czechoslovakia. Third, the cause and consequence of the push and pull of the Cold War. This is best illustrated through the story of the Berlin Wall in East Germany. And then finally, how reform eventually brought an end to the Soviet Union, and we're going to be taking a look at two important concepts, first in Poland, which is known as solidarity, and then in the Soviet Union itself, known as perestroika, or the Russian word for reform. Let's just plot this in our timeline in order for us to better understand what are the issues. We're looking at Hungary in 1956 and Czechoslovakia in 1968. Even though these are 12 years apart, there's a lot of similarities between these two events. We'll be looking at the Berlin Wall, which starts around 1961, one of the most important issues that surrounds the Kennedy administration and his dealings with the Soviet Union, specifically Nikita Khrushchev. And then we'll be looking at Poland around 1980 and the reforms that start to take place in the Soviet Union around 1985. As a reminder, this is essentially what is referred to as the Cold War era. Now, there are 5 focus points. The first 2 are about Czechoslovakia and Hungary. So the first video in our series will be bundled together. The third video that we will have will be just on the Berlin Wall. And then bundled again, we'll talk about Poland and the reforms in the Soviet Union at the same time. So with the introduction, there will be 3 videos which focus on content, and then there will be a conclusion video also. In Hungary and Czechoslovakia, we will be essentially looking at the cycle of what is the causes that lead to revolts in these 2 countries, what the reaction from the Soviet Union was, the similarities that these 2 countries had, the differences, and then essentially what the world did in order to react to these events. In Berlin, we're going to be talking about that very important symbol of the wall, which divides the democratic people on one side of Berlin from the people who were under Soviet control in the east. In Poland, we're going to be talking about this important individual, Lech Wałęsa, who is an important union member and an individual who is essentially uniting Polish workers in this idea of solidarity. And then, of course, we have to talk about Mikhail Gorbachev, the Soviet premier leader that essentially helps to bring reform to the Soviet Union in the 1980s. So that in a nutshell is our first video on the topic of the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. Thanks for joining me watching this video, and we'll talk more in class.